was really looking at how joints work and how they heal, and was really involved in physiotherapy and sports therapy, and spent really all of my time drilling down further and further into specific joints kinesiology. And I got a little kind of disenchanted with not only the way that I was taught, but the outcomes that I could get with people, because I found that the further and more specific I got with people, the less possibility we saw with their outcome. And so I started to get intrigued with nutrition. A couple of mentors of mine had kind of pointed in this direction of, very simply, that the only thing that our body has to build and rebuild tissue and build and rebuild health from the inside out was the food that we put in. And the quality of the tissue that we could build was really reflective of quality of the food that we put in our body. And that point just so intrigued me that I started to look further and further into generating health by putting foods that are close to nature and whole foods and anti-inflammatory foods, and started to recognize very, very quickly that when the body is filled with nutrients and nutrient-dense foods, so much of the lifting around health and healing is done. The body does it really, really well. And so as I continued on that pathway, I started to recognize that it wasn't always just being able to tell people what to eat and what not to eat. The people were going to do what they were going to do. And I wanted to figure out, well, what would help people change their behavior? And that really took me into the world of NLP and hypnosis and working in that realm, looking at how we could help change people's minds so that they could choose foods really that were going to be better for their body. But in that process, I really started to recognize the impact that our psychology has on our overall health, well-being, physiology, capacity to absorb nutrients and choose foods. And it really intrigued me. And so all along this process, it was kind of like my career started by drilling down deeper and deeper into the body and making the body kind of smaller and smaller. But reaching a dead end, it was like, as I started to pull the lens back further and further and further, and started to realize, oh, life is so much bigger than joints. It's so much bigger than cells. It's so much bigger than food. It's so much bigger than our thinking. It's so much bigger than that I got really, really intrigued with what else was also true. My life has always been really intrigued by consciousness somehow, some way. And I remember even back when I was probably 18, 19 years old, reading books that were kind of in and around Eastern philosophy, but I never could really make sense of it at all. And in the early 90s, a friend of mine who was really into health realization. And I had no idea what that was, but he thought health realization was the coolest thing. And he tried to explain it to me. He gave me a book, and I read the book, and the book just kind of went over my head, and I put the book on my shelf and really never really thought much about it again. And that was in the early 90s. And then in around 2000, somewhere around 2010, I came across a podcast, and somebody said something about we're living in the feeling of our thinking. And I know Michael Neal has said that many times. I'm not even sure if it was him that said it at the time that I was listening to the podcast. But he also said something about Dicken Bettinger. And that name rang a bell at the time as well, because my friend had spoken about Dicken. And so I literally rifled through my bookshelf, and I was looking for this book that he gave me back in the early 90s. And I found the book, and I pulled it off the shelf, and it was a book by Sydney Banks called Second Chance. And so I sat down and I reread the book, and it just smacked me right between the eyes. And from that point on, I knew that that health was something that was innate. And it just spoke so deeply to what I couldn't articulate, but knew that was true already. And that there was an innate capacity for all of us to heal in any given moment of time. And it really was much more about, less about techniques and strategies and much more about the synchronization of ourselves with nature and seeing ourselves as nature, as a wonderful piece of nature that's expanding in its own consciousness. And the more I saw that, the more the things that I was doing in and around techniques and strategies to help people heal, they suddenly just didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And that it really revolved around helping people see their true innate health, while at the same time looking in the direction of how nutrition can facilitate that in the physical form. And as all those components kind of came together as they did and as they continue to, I started to find that healing is a lot less mysterious and perhaps even less complicated, and that the most complicated thing in the healing equation is the constructs that we create and the difficult thinking that we have about healing and health. And as soon as those things are loosened up a little bit, health and healing want to happen, and health and healing want to be expressed. So that's kind of where I am now, and that's where I find myself working with people is kind of helping them pull the lens back from wherever they are on their health and healing journey, wherever they are in their health and performance journey, and recognizing what's already true and innate, what already wants to be expressed, and then simply kind of falling into the passenger seat and letting that part of them do the heavier lifting.